Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith. Tonight we have Mat Cloer and our co-host Dave Anderson. Matt is in Orlando, works with the USTA. Dave running the Brookhaven Junior Development Program, a large and very successful one. I'm in small town Ave Maria, inland from Naples, Florida. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be back on.
Yeah, you guys are oldie goldies with the podcast. Let's touch upon this first. USTA coaching. I understand they're offering liability insurance, so it makes the program they're offering similar in that way to the PTR, the Professional Tennis Registry, and the USPTA, the RSPA. Help me out, Racket. It's Racket Sports Professional Association.
Yeah. No, that's not really the area that I work in, but obviously it's under the USTA, and it's definitely trying to get into coaching education, and I think it's something that CA has been wanting to do for a long time, and I think they're moving forward with it. And they launched some things right before the US Open or right around the US Open, and I think they're starting to try and put more and more content online, but I think they're solely focused on the tennis teaching industry, and I think where maybe some of the other organizations have, with all the racket sports, from a padel to pickleball are, really popular. I think some of the USPTR and things like that have pivoted to more of a racket sport and are pretty global. And USTA coaching wants to focus on tennis in America and how to help the coaching industry get better. So I think that's headed up by Craig Morris. I know Megan Rose is very involved as well, and a group of people that are, working hard to, try and get that going.
Matt, for the listeners, what do you do with the USTA? Why don't you go back? And I know you've been on before. Why don't you tell us again what your role is?
Sure. Yeah. So, my title is Senior Manager of Performance Analytics and Coaching Education. And I do, I still love being on the court and able to get out there a couple hours a day with wherever I can help, whether it's with, some of our junior boys or junior girls, or, getting on the court with some of the pros that come into town as well. Maybe a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in some ways, but, spend a lot of time, looking at film and going through some of the stats, for players and talking with their coaches and trying to help, come up with some ideas and insights that will, hopefully help kind of, make some things a little clearer, or maybe even point out some things that maybe the coaches or the players aren't seeing. And, just really try and be support from, some of our juniors to the top pros, the best that we can.
Go ahead, Dave. You fire away.
Yeah, back to the initiative. I think it's a sound initiative, much needed. I love that the sole focus is on tennis. I think that's an important thing, that the people that are involved in the racket sport industry, many, you use the word pivot, many have pivoted and have branched out into pickle and padel, and gosh, it seems like it's just increased so much here in the last year and a half. And so I really like that the USTA is doing that, and anxious to see how, it all unfolds.
Matt, what was the name of the lady you mentioned? You mentioned Craig Morris. Who was the lady?
Megan Rose. Megan was a really good player growing up. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank on Megan's maiden name, but played number one at Miami, was a really good Megan Bradley. And, was a really good junior, went on to do some college coaching, I think at Princeton.
Yeah.
And then, made her way to the USTA and had a couple of different hats during her time at the USTA. And I'm probably not, going to be able to remember all of them, but, she was the head of our USTA Pro Circuit division. I also think that she, was the head of kind of some of the major events and helping with execution of teams going to the Olympics and the Davis Cup and Billie Jean King Cup. So she had a team of people that were helping her, put all that together. And then I think at some point earlier this year or or beginning or near the end of last year, transitioned over to, getting into the USTA coaching side of things and helping on that side.
With the USTA, for the longest time, maybe this is the wrong phrase, but they were politically correct just in supporting the PTR and the former USPTA, now RSPA. But this effort, this initiative, they're standing alone. They're their own organization when it comes to certifying and licensing tennis teaching pros. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think that they're offering a bunch of different packages that for coaches, for programs, for clubs that create some. I think they're really trying to create some unity and really try and help the tennis teaching industry. And then with that, obviously there's some liability insurances. I know that they have some of the vendors in the sport with Wilson and Babolat being able to head as well, and being able to offer special packages for coaches to get some equipment and things like that as well. So I think a lot of similarities to my dad was a part of the USPTA and PTR for a long time. So I think some similarities in how they're what some of their offerings are, but definitely kind of trying to lead the charge for tennis in America.
Don't you think that the percentage is really, really quite high, that most federations, the USTA being a federation, that most federations do head up the tennis education for their country?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's something that I think, for a long time that, USTA has been wanting to try and get into. And I think they took that big leap forward, and, definitely having it under the federation, just like a lot of the other countries in the world, I think is probably a good way to go about it.
Dave, have you ever met Craig Morris?
I was trying to think of that. I don't believe I have. May have crossed paths, but I don't believe I have.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about his background, Matt?
Well, I know Craig is Australian. I don't know Craig, super well, but we definitely, have had some great interactions. And Australian, I remember the first time ever seeing Craig Morris's name, but it was also within a video on the ITF website with Craig Tiley, who both you and Dave know really well. I don't know where they were in the world. I know it's like kind of like an indoor covered red clay court. And Craig and Craig were both, presenting on some doubles tactics at one of the ITF conferences. I know Craig, has a background in coaching as well. I think spent some time with Samantha Stozer and with the Tennis Australia Federation. So, and then I don't know how long Craig's been here at the USTA, probably close to 10 years or more. Yeah, that's what kind of my background of knowing Craig.
No, I know he was with dollars to donuts. I would bet that he was the Fed Cup captain for Australia. So I know he worked with a lot of pro players. I know I haven't met him, but he's had several positions. What about some of the changes at the USTA? Then we can move on. You think he's gone from one department to the next, or now is he in charge of player development, or is player development tied in with community tennis? How does that all work?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, Craig's not, over player development. He's, I think it's strictly USTA coaching, and, we have a new general manager at player development, Tracy Davies, who took over from Martin Blackman. I think, and I think USTA coaching is like a separate arm. It's not really under community tennis as well. Hopefully I'm not putting my foot in my mouth by saying that, but I that's the way I understand it.
Yeah, I just got back from spending a week in Toronto, and it's a club in Toronto. Dave and I both went there for the first time. The first time I was ever there was with Dave, and it was 33 years ago. And it was first Richard Hernandez and Miran Mann, and then Patrick Jeffrion, and had lunch with Philip McCars, the owner of the club since 1984. And he just said that Richard faced, who also was a classmate of Craig Tiley's, he said Richard's always faced great opposition because he, in Canada, tried to teach the American method. And I'm thinking to myself, what is the American method? So maybe there will.
I was thinking the same thing when you said that.
Maybe with their initiative that eventually there would be a a method. Method might be a word that's accepted more than system, curriculum, pathway. There should be a way to unite tennis teachers, I've always said, so they can agree that tennis is played on a rectangle and water runs downhill, not uphill. Yeah, there just needs to be a strong base of information. Anything else, Dave, in this area? We move on to get down to analytics. Here, talk a little bit more about Matt and his numbers. Anything else on USTA coaching, Dave?
Like you just said, I'm anxious to see how everything unfolds, and I think that being in the trenches every day, I hope the USTA coaching, like the former USPTA, USPTR, so many people aren't even certified in anything now. It's completely unregulated, and so hopefully, from the federation end, it can at least get regulated a little bit better to where people that are in the business are tied into one of the organizations to help support the cause. So fun to see where it goes.
That reminds me of a quick story. I was in Atlanta, such a big tennis market, and way back when, I know, Matt, you mentioned your father, Ernie. So many of it had so much to do with Dennis Vandermeer, Dave and myself included. So Tennis Club of the South, a tornado touches down and there's no tennis. Just everything's rained out. So all these tennis people showed up at Tennis Club of the South. And I hadn't seen Dennis in a few years. And so we were just picking up branches and helping out. And so we had a lot of time to chit chat. We weren't running a clinic or a camp. And Dennis said, Stephen, you were right. It's education, not certification. Because we ran a 2-year program, and he had the tennis university. I think he initially started off as 10. It might have been scaled down to 5. It was like an amazing short course. It is true. There's so many people winging it. I've always said, how's it go? If you can't wing it if you wung it. If you wung it, you can wing it. But there's a lot of people that are just making it up as they go along. But no, let's turn to numbers. Numbers tell a story. Tell us a little bit about what you do with performance analytics, Matt.
Sure. We try and, we're really lucky that, working with, Grand Slam nations, being able to share video and with the way media is today, you can get a lot of match footage and full matches and then with the Hawkeye systems and Bolt 6s of the world that have the electronic line callings and have all a big bunch of different cameras lined around the courts around the world, there's a lot of data, that can be captured on a tennis court. And so a lot of it goes into a CSV file, it looks like a big spreadsheet. And to a lot of people, it's pretty overwhelming to see a lot of, and it's point by point, shot by shot. And so what we're able to do is working with, a third party who's kind of the head for the ATP on the data side, and it's called Tennis Biz. And, we're able to get kind of the data that gets, translated and visualized into being able to see certain patterns or service tendencies and percentages and, a lot of numbers. So then we take those CSVs and the data and we attach it to the video. So then we work with a Dartfish platform that you can load the matches in. All those matches are tagged through Hawkeye, and then you can kind of get into some nuts and bolts of what's really going on within the points. Where the points being won, where the points being lost. Just from depth to width to speeds of the ball to spin rate. So pretty much a lot of things that you can kind of think of and have the imagination to ask. For the most part, you can go and find. Sometimes it's not that easy, but so yeah, it's pretty fun to be able to look and see what the best players in the world are doing. And this year, is the first time as well as the juniors who are able to play the junior slams. They're playing on the same court as a lot of the pros, and so you're able to get the same kind of data that the pros are getting. So, it's really neat. And, I think with a lot of the potential of electronic line calling coming into, where it's more affordable for clubs and tournaments, I think that you're going to see a lot more data, at junior events and adult events and things like that in the years to come. So, definitely, I think a lot of sports have been very, highly data driven, and I think tennis is catching up, or trying to at least.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Dave.
I get excited when I've had people come and do demos. Matt, I think I've spoke to you about them, some of the various companies, and, really layman's terms, that analytics from our end, just showing where players are hitting from, speed, spin rate, all of that. If you had told me when I was a young boy, or a junior player, that ball speed was going to be up at averages of 80 plus miles an hour and 2,400 RPMs, it would have seemed like a flying car off the ground. And, we talk a lot about tennis and controlling time and space. And what trends do you see? Because obviously ball speed has made it to where people value controlling the time through just sheer power, and the space element of it. Obviously, we see it with Sinner at the baseline and Alcaraz playing all over the court. But any comments on that, and in trends that you see that may be heading back the other way towards people playing more all over the court? Because it is certainly it seems like they're taking time away just through sheer ball speed now in this generation.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. I think that's definitely something that, try to look at, as much as I can and we can as a staff, and trying to, the ball speeds are fast. Obviously I think the technology with the rackets and the string, and, there's a lot of things that are playing into why things are faster, but also the athlete. I think the athlete is stronger, faster. You look at I think in the top 10 right now, I think the average height's 6'3". They're big, they're strong. Even though you look at a guy like Sinner and you're like, oh, he's pretty slender, but he's really explosive. He takes the ball so early. He's really compact off both sides. I think the trend. I think you look at a guy like even Sinner. He's trying to develop more of an all-court game, because they know that, and he's probably, arguably the best baseliner in the world right now. Toe to toe with somebody. Even on the women's side, you look at like Zabalenka, and she's trying to add more variety to her game. So I think definitely the drop shot has definitely become something that is coming into play more, just to break rhythm. To you're able to hit the ball and push your opponent off the baseline, further and further, and they leave a ball short and hit a minus, and instead of trying to blast a ball, they're already so far back that you don't even have to hit you see Sinner use that a lot against Zverev. You see Zabalenka really implementing that into her game, and they're not using it a lot, but it's a really effective play. The volley is still the highest impact play on both the men's and the women's tour. So getting to the net, when players are hitting a volley, it's close to 70% win rate on both sides. So, whenever you can get to the net, with those opportunities, and, still have to learn to volley well, and, have the good fundamentals, and understand strategically, where you are at in the court and when to play, keep the ball in front of you. When, did you catch the ball above net level, and can you finish the volley off? So, I think that there's less, when players are coming to the net, though, there's less, combination volleys. It's an approach, and usually they're cleaning up a volley. They're not usually hitting, too many volleys up there. So, I think that, and it hasn't changed. I think in tennis, the serve and the return are the two most important shots. I think arguably the return's becoming more important. How you counter, counterattack or become neutral in, within the rally after a really good serve on both the men's and the women's side. Girls are starting to serve a lot faster, and and then the guys' speeds on the serves are, I was lucky enough to get to go to Turin with Ben Shelton a few weeks ago, and he played three. He played Zverev, he played Felix Auger-Aliassime, and then he played center. All three guys served 80% first serves at 127 miles an hour with extremely high accuracy, really, really close to the line. So obviously it's indoors. The elements are pretty clean and pretty easy from a ball toss standpoint. You're not dealing with too much, wind, but I mean, that's kind of, so how do you counter that? You're going to have to, you see a lot of players adjusting positions on returns, whether it's deep in the court, trying to take the ball earlier on second serves. Still second serve is one of the shorter balls that you're going to get within the rally. So, I think just having, those are the trends that, that I'm seeing, that we're seeing. I think, we kind of did a study on the US Open. We took the quarterfinal matches on both the men and the women's side. And, so from like a transition play, there are 344 transition plays combined between the men and the women, and that's the quarterfinal matches on. I think one of the matches was a default because I think one of the girls, got injured in the round of 16, so that they're winning 75% of the time when they're transitioning, 344 transition plays. If you can, you'd break that down to points and between matches, it's not that much in terms of, percentage of time getting to the net, but, the win rate's really high. So I think figuring out ways that, get to the net. It doesn't always have to be off an approach shot. It doesn't, it can be a serve and volley. It can be a return and come in. A player's in a defensive position, in a weak position, and they're playing an underspin backhand, looking to take time and take the ball out of the air. So, I think those are, ways to, continue to look to get to the net. And on the boys' side and the girls' side for the juniors, there are 250 transition plays combined, and they were winning 67%. So I think that, looking to play an offensive game is really, really important in today's game. And it starts with your serve, starts with a good return, but then you kind of dial that back into, having the good fundamentals and mechanics and grips to be able to, develop those, and then just hitting a ton of reps with, the right mindset every time you go on the court. I think the number one way to get to the net on the men's and the women's side today is the first shot after your serve. Obviously, with a serve coming in so big, the return's not always you're not able to get back to neutral on the return. So that's the first opportunity. So, between the men and the women, it's happening about 32% of the time, an approach off the first ball, off the serve. So when you're thinking from a developmental aspect of it is, being able to hit a really good serve, but are you ready to look to move forward and take advantage of that ball and follow it in? And when players are doing that, they're winning 76% of the points. So, I think if we all had a lot of, wanted to play the lottery and we had a 76% chance of winning, we'd probably play as much as we could. So I do think that, and Alcaraz from the quarterfinals on, he came forward the most. He won the tournament. He came forward 56 times in 3 matches. He won 79% of the points. Pegula came forward 21 times. She won 62% of the points. So, the girls, the women aren't coming forward quite as much or looking to come forward quite as much as the guys. They're not playing behind maybe as big a shots, or, maybe some of them don't move as well or aren't as fast. So I think that there's definitely some thoughts that, go into that. But yeah, so it went from, looking at the numbers right now, it went from Alcaraz at 79%, came forward 56 times. Sinner, so that's an average of about 18 per match. Sinner came forward 47 times, won 57%. He came forward about 15 times. You have Djokovic, he played one less match because he lost in the semis. And he came forward 47 times. He had an 88% win percentage. He came forward about 23 and a half times per match. Felix, one less match as well, averaged about 23 times a match. And Musetti was the lowest. He only came forward about 6 times per match, and he only won 57%. But then you have kind of looking at the women, you have Pegula, 21%, or 21 attacks, 62%. It's about 10 and a half times in her 2 matches. Zabalenka, right behind her, 10 times per match. So, those are some numbers from the U.S. Open, and some, I definitely think that, how you serve, how you return. And I think also too, it's how the game's moving so fast right now. It's having that ability to almost change rhythm. So playing, having that ability to play a good, effective underspin backhand to, can you throw in a serve and volley? Can you play different varieties on your serve? Are you confident the guy serving standing so far back, or a girl standing so far back? Can you serve and volley? Can you take speed off? Can you play so some skills outside of being able to just bash the ball are really important to develop, to be able to counterattack the speed at which, everything's being played at. But obviously you got to be able to handle the speed, and you're going to have to be able to send some of it back as well.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. Do you think that the women's game, because the lack of net advances, do you think a little bit of it is attributed in your research to the ball being a little more linear, lower ball line?
Yeah, I think definitely that some of them aren't playing with as much top as the guys, and the RPMs aren't as as high. Definitely it's a little bit flatter, a little bit lower. So I definitely think that plays. I think that plays into it. I'd have to really kind of haven't done a total study on that, but I think from the from an eye perspective and things like that, I think so.
Always trying to get kids, and going back to a Vic Braden thing, when your opponent's in the corner with underspin, charge, and but it seems like really in dealing, I pretty much live in the junior tennis world, and getting kids to really recognize delayed attacks. And you alluded to that a little bit, forcing shots or situations where they've just kind of opened the court up in a baseline exchange and then just going forward. That seems to be a pretty good route for many, many players. Would you agree with that? To learn that skill? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that ability, like you said, the delayed attack, or kind of some people refer to it as sneaking, so it's not necessarily, you hit a good forcing ball with good depth that puts the player into a weak position. And, from a right-handed perspective, they have to let go and open racket face. And, that's definitely, having that, the eye is is it, do I need to attack? Do I need to jump? And I think it's that similar mindset that we talk about a little bit at the net. Is it a drive? Is it a lob? In this situation, it's is this my time? Is this my time? And then when you do, you got to be fast, and your goal is always, to try and catch it above the net. And so, I think those opportunities are huge, and learning those at, really from a developmental level, from, as young as you can. But, I think also, just developing that comfortableness inside the service line in, and inside the yellow zone, inside the green zone, being able to, I still think that we always hit way more ground strokes than we hit volleys. So, the more confident you are at hitting a volley or feeling comfortable transitioning and moving forward, the more willing you're going to be to, and probably more, your eyes will see it as well, as more open to say, oh, there it is, and I'm going to take off, as opposed to, oh, there it is, I'm going to run left and just crack another forehand from a, maybe not as great of a position, offensive or winning position, and then maybe it resets. So definitely something that from a junior perspective, and even at the highest levels, you see Center doing that, he hits a forehand, and coach slices, and he's on his way to the net to try and clean it up. So it's a skill that needs to be worked on quite often.
Matt, for our listeners, you were with the USTA, and then for I think it was 2 years, you went to the University of Florida. And now you're back with the USTA, and through that experience, came very close to the Sheltons. Could you tell us a little bit about the progression under your watch? I mean, when you were the years that you've been around Ben Shelton now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I had the opportunity to, go to the University of Florida in 2022, to work with Coach Shelton. And, Ben had just won the NCAAs. I started that summer. He just won the NCAAs in May. He hadn't officially turned pro yet when I started. So, he was training in Gainesville and, really got to, spend a lot of time with, around him and Brian, and, spent a lot of times in an indoor building and, no AC, during the summer, just to kind of get out of the sun a little bit, also doing some workouts, so, kind of got to, be in the trench with Ben, during those, my first few months on the job. And, that's the summer that he took off. He was super confident, after winning NCAAs. And, I think that's the summer he beat Casper Ruud when Casper was 5 in the world and, took off. He still had 2 years of eligibility, and would have been pretty fun to be able, coach him in a collegiate setting. But, I think, and then I was able to work with Brian for a year before he went on tour full time with Ben. So, yeah, got to, know the Sheltons really well, and still, fortunate enough to be able to, be around Ben and Brian, here in Orlando when they come down. And I was actually on the court with Benny today. So yeah, heck of an athlete, and, high character, the whole family. And so it's been a lot of fun to watch his rise and his development. And, I think he's getting better, and so should be fun to watch the rest of his career.
I have to ask you a true or false question. Is it true or false that Ben Shelton was not very athletic until he started playing one-on-one basketball with Scotty Perelman?
Yeah.
True or false? True or false?
Would have to ask the Pearl. I'd say it's
got to be true. Come on.
I'd say it's probably got to be true. Definitely.
No, every time Shelton's on TV, I pump up the Pearl. Our listeners, he's been a guest a couple of times. There's only one Scotty Perelman. He's amazing. Go ahead, Dave. On Ben Shelton, any questions?
No, I was going to go back to the stats and just ask how in depth you were involved in, the doubles end of it. Is that being analyzed at the same level, or is that project to be completed in the future?
Yeah, I think that's to be completed in the future. It's definitely something that, even from an ATP tour perspective, there's not a ton of analytics like that's available for singles. So it's definitely something that we are going to look to do. We want to get more involved in next year. It's definitely an area that, I think it's important for developing, especially, coming all the way from juniors all the way up through collegiate into, playing pro tennis. Doubles is a key aspect in developing, your as being a complete player. So yeah, I can't, I wish I could, but I don't have, the information from a doubles perspective right now to be able to share as much, but it's definitely something that is something that we here at USTA Player Development that we want to get involved in a little bit more as well.
Matt, could you give us a shout out for Dave Ramos? I mean, there are two of you. Are you a two-man band with analytics, or do you tell us what Dave does, and do you have a lot of support in that
Sure.
area?
Yeah. Dave's the director of the analytics department. So there's 4 of us: Dave, myself, Catherine Gonzalez, and Peter Rijos. Yeah, so there's 4 of us in the department, and we all kind of have, we all work as a team, and have our own roles, and that we're trying to cover from juniors all the way up to the top of the game. So obviously at the junior level right now, there's not a lot of data from an on-court perspective. I think that there are some videos out there that swing vision is one where you can hang your phone up and and it will give you some data, and it's actually really good to be able to. It gives you at least some information and to start with, and there's more coming out, and we try and film as much as we can, and try and get as much information that we can for our coaches to be able to watch and look through. So Dave was kind of Dave and Jeff Russell, who was here a long time and now is kind of started his own company and does a lot with a lot of the collegiate teams. Dave and Jeff were the ones who really kind of tried to get this department kind of off the ground at USTA for a long time, and then they were able to get it going. And so throughout kind of our department, covering juniors to pros, we're also helping in the collegiate space as well, and offer some 2 fellowships, one in the spring, one in the summer. For anyone, it's one person in the spring, one person in the fall, or in the summer fall. Goes through the U.S. Open to come and learn, some, day to day, and be able to be, kind of learn what we do. Also, you don't have to be an avid tennis, junkie, but it's something that's pretty neat that we and then we also offer some like remote fellowships where you can learn to kind of use some of the programs and dive into some things that might interest you. And so those are some things that we do within the department. But yeah, it's pretty fun. I'm a tennis junkie, so being able to watch tennis and quite a bit of tennis every day is pretty fun.
Matt, let me ask you a twofold question. One, Warren Pretorius, who I've talked to many, many times, had a lot to do with over the years. Is he still connected? And then two, was always telling Warren with the numbers that you don't hear much about are numbers pertaining to the grip, the swing shape, or even the body position. Is your department at the high end working with the top pro players? Do you think coming back to Megan Rose and Craig Morris, is there going to be a connection with bringing or understanding, no such thing as little strokes for little folks or little kid tennis, big kid tennis, tennis is tennis? Is there a connection to have a better understanding of the pros for helping out the young kids?
I certainly hope so. I think it'd be great to have, definitely some numbers and, some ranges of where here, looking at swing shapes and Alcaraz forehand. And, we're really lucky that we get a lot of slow motion video from the US Open every year, but I think being able to quantify those numbers a little bit would be great, to be able to, from a stroke perspective, obviously with grips and understanding and things like that. But I hope that there's a connection to be able to, from an education standpoint, from a biomechanics standpoint, and finding, the commonalities and similarities to hitting the ball more efficiently.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Dave.
I mentioned doubles earlier, and I'm a huge proponent of doubles, as I know you guys are, and building blocks of a tennis player can really benefit from great doubles. And it saddened me today. I was happy but sad. A young boy in our program, he won a gold up at Chicago at the National Indoors in 16 doubles, and it was 8-6 for the gold ball. The one set, the 8-game pro set, to me, it just doesn't register. It's kind of tying into what Steve was saying. I think that I hope that systematic change of doubles would take place to really encourage people to build all court games, to recognize the times that there are moments in singles matches where you can go forward in a variety of ways. And I just think doubles is just such a great set of training wheels, so to speak, to learn how to ride that bike. And I feel like that's why, I know we're so heavily influenced by the pro game, and I hope some players at the top really start turning that corner. Tennis overall is a lot more fun when you have contrast in styles to go up against each other and have somebody, in the rushing role and somebody in the countering role. And But I hope the doubles can be that vehicle again for kids to be able to discover all court skills. Not really a question, just a comment.
Just today, a college player is out early and he's here for 6 weeks. Very fit, very positive, energetic, and people just played one set and they were finished. I said, when you're done with your set, just start playing ghost doubles. And he served me staying back. I said, no, why don't you just do this for your singles game while you're playing ghost doubles? Just serve and volley. And he said, yeah, okay. I mean, it's so much fun to hit a volley. I think, Matt, we have a lot of parents listen to our podcast. Maybe you could transition from commenting on just the character and the competitiveness. You have so many amazing experiences, having just got back from the ATP finals, but transitioning into, you're working as the coach for Lindsay Davenport, the captain of the Fed Cup team. Why don't you just talk a little bit about just their athleticism and competitiveness? I think a lot of times people don't realize there's so much to the game as far as just being an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I think with both the men and the women, the movement, the speed, the power, and I'm not talking about power from hitting the ball, the power at which they get from point A to point B, on the court from a movement perspective, the stops, the starts, are you got to be an athlete first, and I think that's huge. And obviously, you want to be the best possible competitor because you look at a guy like Novak Djokovic, who's won 24 Grand Slams and been on tour for forever. You got to love it. You got to love it first, and then you got to love to compete. And you look at it was really interesting. I was telling the story the other day, but you always you don't get to see with the way that the tour finals was set up. You don't get to see everybody, in terms of a couple courts here and there, and practice times and schedules. But Sinner was in Ben's group, and you get to watch. Alcaraz was around quite a bit, but those were the two that you could watch practice, but you could also kind of like watch what they're doing, when they're not hitting tennis balls. And one of the practice courts at the main site, the restaurant overlooked the practice court, and I saw it on 3 occasions. Center would be eating his meal with his back turned to the practice court. No one was on the practice court, but the moment someone started hitting tennis balls on that court, he turned his chair around, he picked up his plate of food, and he started watching practice. It didn't matter if it was a doubles team warming up. It didn't matter if it was a doubles team practicing, if it was Alex de Minaur. It didn't matter who it was. He turned around and he just sat and watched the whole practice. So I look at that and go, okay, this guy's really competitive. He's loves the game, but he's really competitive on how he's wanting to learn. I'm going to watch these guys volley. Okay. But it was really interesting to see it. And it was, 3 times that I saw that, and it was every time there was no one on the court. They start hitting. He immediately turned his chair around, started watching practice. Didn't matter who it was, you have Alcaraz, he's, with his team, and, they're really, they love to play a card game. I don't know the card game they play, but they'll play it for a little while. And the next thing, you're looking over and him and his coaches are, have an iPad out and they're watching a film, of someone that he might play, or they're just watching some matches of him pointing things out. So at that level, they're looking to gain every edge they can. I was reading something that I'm going to paraphrase it, but Alcaraz was basically like, yeah, I think at this point, and, I've played a lot. I know a lot of my opponents that I'm going to play against, but I'm looking for the nuances in their game. What are some little things that they do that maybe not, away from, from the overall things that they do, but what are the little things that, maybe I could exploit, or, whether I get them off, they're slightly off balance here or there. But, I think, that's, and I think, you look at Ben, he's such a competitor and he loves the sport and he loves to compete. And so, you got to love the sport and you got to love to compete. Those are the two first. And then, then you just got to put in a lot of reps and just, stay at it. I think those are some things that stand out to me. And then you asked about kind of some time with Billie Jean King Cup. Is that what you asked as well, Steve?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I was lucky to get a call from Lindsay Davenport earlier at the beginning of the year, and Lindsay asked if I would come on as one of the coaches for the team, and so Lindsay as the captain, and Jermaine Jenkins, who is the other coach, and then along with myself, and so really, really cool and humbling experience, and one to be able to represent the U.S. and in a really cool team environment. Yeah, same thing with the girls. They're obviously, you don't get to the highest level without being a competitor. Obviously, you got to have talent and skills, but at some point, you're going to have to battle through and compete and be gritty and win matches. And so I think that it's no different. Every top player at any sport in the world, has had to put in the time and put in the hard yards and done the work, and but they've also had to persevere and figure out ways to problem solve and compete. So it's hard to be a really successful athlete if you can't compete and problem solve and figure out. Part of competing is problem solving. Finding a way, still believing that you can find a way. So you got to have the heart and you got to have the will.
Years ago, I had some time, the opportunity to be around Davis Cup, be on the inside and be with the team, and the players were there with their private coaches at the Billie Jean King Fed Cup event. Did the private coaches come as well?
They're invited. Lindsay has Lindsay likes to have it as a real team atmosphere and keep it pretty amongst the team, and she likes to have where they're invited for sure, but she definitely likes to kind of have their feedback from off the court. But yeah, it's we played Slovakia in the first round in April, and we're able to. I think Slovakia lost in the finals to Italy the year before, and so playing on someone's home turf in a pretty packed arena is is tough, and the girls were able to find a way through, and then had the opportunity to go to China about 10 days after the U.S. Open, and had to play 2 matches. We played Kazakhstan first round, and Emma Navarro was down a couple match points and found a way. And then Rybakina came out, and she played incredible at the end of the year and throughout the end of the year, and she played really well against Pagula. And then it came down to a doubles that we were able to pull out, and then had another fight with Great Britain, and then came up a little bit short against Italy. Those girls were pretty on point and competed extremely well and fought hard, really, really hard for their country. And, Italy just won another Davis Cup. So, from a pride perspective, I think Italy, they're really, take a lot of pride in, representing their country. And so, hopefully we get a chance to take them down next year.
Oh, it's amazing experiences. Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead, Matt, or I should say Dave, to Matt.
I think it's so important. I'm always telling people what you just, to echo your words there a little bit about, the passion. You got to love it, and then you got to love to compete. And it seems that if we could inject that right into the veins of junior tennis players, it would be a huge contribution to the sport. Do you feel that on the tour, Matt, and the dealings that you have with the players and such, that overall, not just among the top tier, but overall, do you feel the level of fight and competitive nature has improved or regressed? Because I certainly feel like in the junior end, it's regressed slightly in my lifetime in the sport. But I'm wondering if you feel that on the tour, it's still flying high.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not on tour full time. I think that, so I have some snapshots and obviously watch a ton of tennis, as much as I can. I think that, that's an interesting, I definitely think obviously at the top of the game, competitiveness, professionalism, love for the sport through the roof. I think that doesn't mean that on some days they're a little bit tired or confidence is a little bit fragile, or, they're human, still deal with getting nerves and feeling, anxious and happy to get out there, but also a little bit of fear in there. So, I think that's all part of process of playing a sport or anything where you have to be on a stage, so to speak. So, I definitely think that once you get into, I don't know, Dave, that's a good question. I think that I would say there's some, really good competitors. I'd say there's some really talented players that maybe sometimes, aren't as, competitive all the time. And maybe that's the reason that they come up a little bit short, or you see where they have just incredible moments like, oh, wow, they just made a final or they just won, but then, maybe there's a streak where they're not as, was that a flash in the pants, but they're still 60 in the world, so, I think, I don't know. I look at a guy and I don't know Bublik very well, but, I think he's been, one of those guys, extremely talented, huge serve, huge game, but maybe hasn't been as consistent. But to be able to watch him this year, be able to be a little more gritty, be a little, and through that winning some matches, gaining some confidence, to be able to finish, one of the best rankings that, that he's ever had. So I definitely think that I think not everybody's a perfect competitor, but at the top of the game, that's the reason that they're there.
Yeah, I think McPhee's book years ago, Levels of the Game. There's so many different levels. I like the saying, the bigger the dream, the bigger the work ethic. I've always thought between say on the men's side, the futures level, and then you go up to Challenger, then you go to ATP, that the work ethic is greater at the top. But I think a lot of times the people at the bottom don't know. They don't even know what hard work is. What's your comment on that?
That's well said. Yeah, I think definitely, you need exposure. You need to be able to, much, as you can. Sometimes you feel like you're working hard, and maybe you are, but is that as hard as that, are you doing everything that you need to do? So I definitely think that there's definitely the level of commitment for players, it differs for sure, and maybe just like the level of ability, but I think you can make up a lot of lack of ability with a really, really high work ethic and really, really high drive. And you're doing everything that you possibly can, checking all the boxes to make up for some of that lack of ability. And again, that ability, being able to work hard and stay disciplined and just do the right thing day after day, consistency, that's a skill in itself, so it takes some ability to be able to do that. You just keep polishing the stone the best that you can, and you give it the best effort, and sometimes it doesn't work out to be I think for a lot of players, you just have to try and be the best that you can be. And then you have to be okay with that. If it's not a top 100 player, if it's not a Division I college tennis player, if it's, whatever that is, I think, as long as you can know that you're trying to do it, you're listening to the coaches, you're listening to your parents, you're trying to do everything that you possibly can to become the best that you can be, then I think that's a win in itself.
Oh, that's well put. Peace of mind. Now let's wrap this up. I appreciate all your time, Matt. I know you're busy. Dave, why don't we'll go one more question each.
Well, I think you hit on so many things from my end that I had questions about, and I just want to say it's been awesome, Matt, being on the phone with you tonight and listening to your tales from the tour, as well as just your mission with the analytics. And I think it ties in extremely well with the mission that we're trying to do in terms of education, and hopefully the two can, blend more and more through the years coming up to help people, enjoy the sport more and understand more about the sport, and appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
It's been fun. Yeah. And hopefully we get to have a few more of these.
Yeah. I'd say this, with time, very easy for me to remember, meeting Matt. I'd always heard his name because another player, Ryler DeHart, like Matt, born in 1984, right, Matt?
1984, yeah.
So, but my son was 16 years old, and Matt was at Florida State. My son went there first. He transferred to Ohio State. But I remember Matt saying, my son saying, nobody could beat Matt. I go, what do you mean? I mean, he's coaching, and he's got, a little baby. He's not sleeping at night. What do you mean? But so anyway, we filmed. A long story. It's probably been on the podcast before. But Jeff Lewis, a tennis junkie, Miran Man, a tennis junkie. So I made a film of Matt's game, and he was so well taught. But there was a few things he changed. But those two guys, they watched the tape, and they kept saying, "Who is that guy? Who is that guy?" And it was Matt. And so it's been 20 years. I know we've been fortunate to do a lot of things together. But no, I really appreciate your time. And yeah, it's great you're with the USTA and the governing body of tennis. I do hope where we started the initiative to improve teaching and coaching. That's really what our podcast is all about. I enjoyed it today. I was talking to Joel Trucker, Charlie Passerelle. There's an autobiography coming out that Joel put together, and I've known him just through the phone. I've actually never met him in person, but telephone relationship. He's a junkie. So he's learned so much about Welby because Welby Van Horn taught Charlie Passerelle, and they're just trying to get approval on some photos. So I'm putting him in touch with Welby's son and the people who own Welby's camp. But yeah, I do think that it's always good to go back. It's always good to go back. The thing about Be Brilliant with Basics. And I think that, thinking about Djokovic and the ready position and how much he's improved his game. And don't you think, Matt, I guess that would be the one thing to touch upon is that as great as the pros are, they square that racket face up. And you see the film all the time with your work now. I guess you could just touch upon that. We'll call it a night, but they don't violate physical laws.
No, they're square at the point of impact, and they're way below the ball, and they're really balanced, and their eyes are still, and they have, have good hitting zones. And, I think kind of, what you're talking about, I think with tennis teaching, the art's where you start, and really getting as many young players involved in the sport. And, it's such a fun sport. It's been so given me so much. And I hope that, a lot more kids, and people will get involved in playing the great sport, because it's the sport of a lifetime. And, but getting the right start and, getting, having, loving the game and, then having the skills and the grips and the swings to be able to, take it as far as you want to take it. That would be, a great goal to continue to work towards. And hopefully, it's something that, more kids start picking up the racket and enjoying it and being able to have, the skills to keep taking it forward.
No, thank you very much, Matty baby, all our listeners.
Yeah.
Great day for tennis. Again, thank you and good night.
Good night, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Thanks.
Thanks.